Get in, chop.
I'm a bit self-aware, sometimes it's fucked up, but life is gonna lie, so I ain't gonna slow up. I'm on a mission to change the face of mental health, kicking knowledge to my people, cause you know that health is wealth. It's your lucky day, cause you tuned into the greatest. Out here striving to survive, sometimes we fake it till we make it. If your mental health is slipping, then please don't touch that dial. Go and grab a cup of tea, cause we gon' be here for a while.
Yo, what's up, you guys? It's your girl, Tree the LPC, and thank you for tuning into the new season of the Self-Aware and Effed Up podcast. I will just let you guys know straight out the gate, I really have missed being able to do this, really being able to have authentic conversations with people from all over the world, sharing their experience of self-aware and effed up. And I'm really excited about this new season, season 4. This young lady reached out to me at the end of season 3, and she asked about being on the show. And I was really inspired by what she has done in her community. And I really wanted to be able to have her on the show for season 3, but we were done wrapping. And so it just happened to work out that she ended up being the first person to reach out for season 4. And so I'm excited to have her here. Her name is Dr. Nathalie Edmond, and she is a truly amazing person. She is a queer psychologist. She's the author of Mindful Race Talk, Building Literacy, Fluency, and Agility. And she is also the pioneer of an anti-racism revolution. And I am here for everything that she does. And I want to make sure I don't leave anything out of her resume. She's also a yoga instructor, connecting you with mind, body, spirit, and soul. So I can't wait to talk to her and have her tell her a little bit more about herself. But without further ado, please welcome to the Self-Aware and Effed Up podcast, Dr. Nathalie Edmond. Hey, Nathalie, how are you doing today?
Good. Yeah, I'm good. I'm so looking forward to this conversation. It's so important to be in community, especially in these times.
Absolutely. I am so glad that we could get you on this season. And I'm really looking forward to just learning a little bit more about you. I did a lot of research to just connect with who you are, but there's nothing like just talking to the real person behind all that you do. So we could go ahead and get started by just having you tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So I am the daughter of 2 Haitian immigrants. And so much of my upbringing was kind of like at the intersection of being Black and being Haitian. And what does it mean to be a first generation born person living in, the New York, New Jersey area. And, and so that kind of drew me to psychology, because I thought, how do I get people, particularly in the Black community, particularly in the Haitian community, to want to talk about mental health? Like, we all need to take care of our mental health, but then also, what does it mean to have all these different identities, and how to love yourself and be okay with the messiness of life, and how all these identities make us great, but also can bring a lot of wounding and trauma. And so at my core, I'm a trauma therapist. And I was drawn to yoga because I realized that talk therapy by itself wasn't enough to heal trauma. And so I've always been searching for, okay, what else? Dance and yoga and music and meditation and nature. And what are all the things that can help us heal? Because, no 2 people are the same. They all need different things to heal.
Right. I love that. I love how your personal story, coming, being a first generation born here, and then trying to connect identity. I love how that brought you to the field of psychology and really wanting to understand human behavior. And speaking about the trauma piece, what intrigued you about that part of just psychology in general?
Yeah, I mean, what was interesting is I think when I was in graduate school, I went to graduate school in Ohio, and one of the clinical experience, right. Because I was, spending most of my life in New York, New Jersey. I was like, let me see what other parts of the US are like, because I don't think it's all the same. And it wasn't the same.
I'm sure.
And one of the years of my clinical experiences, I was at the women's prison in Ohio. And I was really struck by how much race played a part of who was in that prison. How much trauma, people's experiences of trauma and the way that they survived trauma led to drug use, being in domestic violence, ways in which they figured out how to survive, which helped to land them in prison. And I really could see the racism and the sexism, and, you know, how many, like majority of them had some history of trauma. And I just thought, wow, there's got to be a different way. And I like to consider myself as someone who tries to aspire to be an abolitionist. And like, how do we, like, you know, ultimately get rid of the prison industrial complex, but also how do we just realize how much people are carrying inside of them? And some people are really good at hiding their pain, or as a society, this goes to like the anti-racism stuff, how as a society, sometimes we're not sympathetic or empathetic to certain people and the ways in which they move around in the world, particularly if you live in a Black or brown, like I think female body, trans body, non-binary body. And I just think like how much poverty or not having as much financial resources also makes people really vulnerable. And I feel like that's amplified in this time, of just thinking about who's the most vulnerable in our society and how just having less resources, just being born into less resources can be a form of trauma.
Yeah. Yeah. I can definitely identify with a lot of what you said. And that was definitely a different, I would say, possibly culture shock going from New York, New Jersey to Ohio. I imagine that'd be just as traumatic as moving to Georgia, which is where I'm from, and the trauma that still lives in Georgia as a state, and just kind of a lot of what I experienced growing up as a poor Black girl in LaGrange, Georgia. There's a lot of different factors that can lead us down that road. Luckily, I made different choices that brought me out of that experience. But a lot of people end up in a system like the prison system, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's so much of the United States. Like there's so many different pockets of the United States with so many different cultures. And then when you look at like, you know, different class levels, like how much money you have and what kind of schools you went to. And I feel like all of that is so fascinating to me. And I just wish we had more exposure to people who are different than us in ways that help us have awe and curiosity rather than division and hate and polarization.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that fascinated me about like just kind of mindful race talk and what you do in your book. And I want to know a little bit more about what drove you or inspired you to do that, because you obviously have a lot of experience in your field, and like even the prison, I can imagine that probably also was an inspiration. But I want to hear a little bit more about what led you to this one, because it's very much needed, but it feels also very niche.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I was someone who never thought I would write a book. I didn't think I had like stuff to say that would take up a couple hundred pages.
Okay.
But, you know, as someone who I was drawn to anti-racism as a hobby, it was like a way that I could be a good ancestor, that I could give back, that I could try to build like systemic change in the community. So I happened to be at a crossroads in June of 2020, right after George Floyd's murder. And I had made this video that was about rage and grief around, you know, this intergenerational trauma that so many Black people experience of the state-sanctioned violence. And people saw this video and started asking me to do more workshops. And so then that's how anti-racism consulting became kind of a full-time job, because I was at this crossroads and I had more time in my life. And so what I experienced after doing it for a couple of years was how much it changed me.
Yeah.
Right. Like how much I could see how much, you know, anti-Blackness or racism was living inside of me, or the things that weren't healed inside of me. I would say like I'm someone who is pretty quiet and introverted many times. And I never thought about how race played a factor in that. Like I made myself a little smaller, a little quieter, particularly in predominantly white spaces, in order to fit in, to not live up to whatever negative stereotypes they might have about Black women. And I feel like so much of my healing has come from the last couple of years of like doing hours and hours and hours of training of how do we talk about race? How do we examine race? Like even as a Black person, how do I examine the racism that lives inside of me just based on watching TV and reading books and like all the ways in which I'm taught to have negative assumptions about all kinds of different people. And then last year I started thinking, like, how do I help more people get access to this information? Because the climate we're living in is so toxic. And people are put into boxes, and there's very little bridges being built to try to make our world better in mainstream culture. And I thought, well, let me download what I've been teaching in workshops, because I think, we can throw out these words, white supremacy and racism and anti-Blackness. They're all like big words, but what do they actually really mean? And I'm one of those who really believes that, like, I think everyone deserves human rights. Everyone deserves respect. I might deeply, deeply disagree with your opinions, and yet I still want the best for you. I'm still rooting for you, even if I don't necessarily want to be in relationship with you, right? And so how do I make that contagious? And how do I use mindfulness and trauma-informed language? How do I notice how my triggers live in my body? And how do I decrease othering other people? And so that's what brought forth the book, is I wanted more and more people to read it and to live into the principles. And I wanted to get it out before the election, because I just thought it was going to be a dumpster fire after the election. Yeah, and it continues to be.
Yeah, it was definitely the right time. And I think that it is something that is long overdue and needed within our community. Like you talked a little bit about confronting those parts of you that you had to make yourself smaller in certain situations. And I definitely can relate to that. Growing up in a place like LaGrange, which was predominantly white, especially in the school system that I grew up in, and a lot of those experiences. And I was like, I can't say that I'm an introvert. I think I'm now an ambivert in these times. But at that particular time, I think there were parts of me, I'm not naturally quiet, but there were parts of me to learn how to be quiet in those situations, because that was what was expected of me. And as I got to high school, I was like, fuck that. I'm not about to be up in here trying to, fit into this model. I'm going home to a predominantly Black neighborhood, but I'm sitting in class where it's me and maybe two other Black kids, and I'm trying to fit in, and I'm losing myself in this because I'm not just this or that. I'm just me, and I had to learn how to be me in those spaces. And I think a lot of us, kind of deal with that internalized racism to a degree until we learn to get that acceptance of who we are and the bodies that we were born into.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it makes me think of like how much I value joy and liberation. At this point, I feel like I'm evolving from focusing on anti-racism to really, like, how do we all get free?
Yeah.
Right. Whatever that freedom looks like. Even thinking about, like, part of my anti-racism journey was like getting really comfortable with being in a bigger, fatter body. Right. Like, as I age and my body changes, right. Like breaking up with diet culture. Right. And noticing, what did I learn from my own mom while she was still alive? Like, what did I learn from society? And what's the beauty of just like, if I'm healthy, what does it matter? If I love my body, like, how do I reclaim things that were taken from me or things I was never taught? And like, how does like this liberation and decolonization, to me, is like at the heart of so much of the work these days.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that we have just historically been taught, and we've been in a situation where we really have never been free. If you want to take it back to, slave trade and things of that nature, the Bible being used to keep us in line, and still being used to keep a lot of us in line if we still have some of those antiquated belief systems. And so I love the movement towards freedom. And I love that your shift in this is leading you more towards that, because I think that a lot of us, we are stuck because we don't understand that we're not fully free, because the freedom has to come from up here, unlocking our minds. And I love that that's where you're going with this, because it's amazing.
I couldn't have said it better. Yeah, it's funny because I ran into someone I was giving like a sermon at a church maybe a month ago. And the day before, I ran into someone a Black older man in the grocery store. And it was so weird because he asked me if I was a doctor, which was strange. Because here I am in my workout outfit. It's like 7 a.m. And I'm like, well, not a medical doctor. And it's so interesting. Unprompted, when I said I was a psychologist, he said, it took me almost my entire life to figure out that freedom is in my mind. And I just thought, oh, that is so powerful. That's going to be like the theme of my sermon because, I've been learning more about African-centered psychology because so much of the psychology I was taught is very much based on white people, right? And so it's like, well, so many Black people are into the spirit and religion and like holistic. And so trying to figure out, like, that's part of my work is figuring out like, well, what's indigenous to me and my people. And what I love is like so many of these Black psychologists and therapists who talk about, that we might not be in chains anymore, but that doesn't mean the chains don't live in our mind still.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And you just caught me all the way off guard talking about sermons. I'm like, hold up now. I didn't see that on the website. So
I gotta have my own little secrets.
I know, but I'm here for that as well. So a lot of what you do, even, in your work as a psychologist, obviously is about helping people heal. Yoga, mind, body, spirit, all of that connection. I love that you tie all of those things together, but you bring it in the spiritual side of it. It's like you got the total package.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I feel like too much therapy doesn't include the spiritual side. Yeah. And yet that's so like integral to so many people.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a missing part that a lot of people don't recognize. And I know that in my practice with a lot of my clients, I make it as important as it is to them. I'm very much a spiritually based person, but if I see someone who is agnostic, I don't care. Your belief system is your belief system. But if you want to bring that into the room and you want to talk through it and you want to process it, I know scripture. I can definitely walk you through some things, but as long as it's client led, I'm definitely here for that. But we do
absolutely
need to tap into that, especially with Black clients, because so much of what we experience is rooted in religion growing up. And so much of that has shaped a lot of my life. And it definitely shaped some of my trauma related to coming out as well. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I just think of spirituality as such a broad category. There's so many, for some people, spirituality is like being in their garden. Right. And being with nature. And so thinking about like, how do we, especially in a time that feels so, for not everyone, but for a lot of people, it's anxiety producing, there's despair, there's hopelessness, there's rage. And how do we leave room for all of that in a way that doesn't make us sick?
Yeah. Yeah. We have to tap into it. I do a lot around like just the dimensions of wellness, and spirituality is a key piece of that I try to walk through with clients. And automatically, as soon as I mention spirituality, for a lot of them, it becomes, oh, I don't go to church. And I'm like, that's not what I asked though, but there's so much of it sometimes that is tied up in that. And so I think it's important for us to look at all of those factors, because I think that sometimes some of us have to get free from those beliefs around religion and, really tap into our spirituality. So I'm glad that you kind of went down that road, because it's so important. But I do want to kind of loop back around to just talking through a little bit more about the anti-racism piece and kind of the movement that you're leading. One thing that intrigued me was that in your book, it seems like it also focuses in on giving advice to the white communities about how to approach those conversations. So can you speak a little bit more about how, if someone wants to be an advocate and wants to show up for Black people, how can they do that? How can they approach that with their peers?
Yeah. One of the things I talk about in my book is I wanted to make sure that the book wasn't only written for white people, because I think we all have a role to play in combating racism. And so when I think about white people in particular, and when I just say white people, I mean anybody who identifies as white or who would pass as white, so that that could be people who identify, let's say, like as a religious minority, but has like maybe lighter skin pigmentation. And so they have some of the privileges that come with whiteness, or lighter skinned people. And so I often think of stages of racial identity development. So for me, like the first step is self-awareness, right? Thinking of your podcast, right? Is if you're not self-aware about who you are as a racial being, right? If you don't even know that you're a racial being, I mean, then that's where you start with the work is, right? It's because so often we think of race as, people with melanated skin pigmentation versus everybody has a race, even though it's particularly in the United States that is so race focused, even when they're talking about color blindness. So I think about for white people, right? How do you change how you talk about race and racism dependent on who you're talking to, right? If you're talking to someone who's overtly racist, I doubt that there's much changing you're going to do with them, right? They're very clear that they think white people are better and everybody else is racially inferior. But I often think of but that's that's the extreme, that most people are more, I would say, like oblivious because maybe they live in predominantly white spaces and they haven't had many interactions with Latine people or Asian people or Black people or Indigenous people. And so the ignorance just comes from lack of exposure, especially if they live in a state where they're not even taught proper history anymore. And so they don't even understand the history and legacy of racism that was the foundation of this country.
Right.
And so then I think about color blindness sounds so good in theory. And yet I don't think it helps us see the whole person. And I think part of the trauma of our country is that because we have so much unresolved racism and unresolved trauma from the history of racism and genocide against Indigenous people, that lives in our bodies, that lives in our bones, that lives in our policies and our institutions and our structures and our schools. And so I think, I often think about, it's not like, do you have any racism in you? It's how does racism live inside of you? How does this notion that whiteness is the standard, how does that live inside of you and shape how you parent, how you teach, how you lead, and your biases? I think that there are a lot of really good white liberal people out there, and they also have work to do, because I think sometimes when we think we're one of the good ones, it can create parts of ourselves that we're not aware of, right? That I know plenty of white liberal people who are harmful, whether it's they're condescending, whether it's, while they're committed to anti-racism, they're not listening to the voices of those who are the most marginalized. They're not willing to share power or yield control or get a little uncomfortable or get a lot uncomfortable in order to change our society. We wouldn't have gotten to this space, this time, with so many, trans people are very vulnerable. If you're undocumented, or even if you're a citizen, I mean, at the rate we're going, right? Like how many Black and brown people are getting deported, illegally detained, their rights are being taken away. So I think about all of us have work to do. So when I say, what would be the advice I would give white people? Check yourself, right? Like think about who are you in community with? And I mean like real community, like people will tell you the truth about your impact. Listen to the voices of those who are the most marginalized. Develop your own practices that help you see the beauty of your ethno-racial identity. I think too many white people are walking around feeling guilt and shame when they start talking about racism. And I don't think liberation is about guilt and shame. I think liberation is about understanding how we're all interconnected and what are the systems and structures and policies in place that make us not experience the beauty of all of humanity and restrict access to rights to some people. So I think I always want people to balance action with self-reflection. Sometimes people do too much self-reflection and then they don't do enough action. And other people do so much action, but they like are so unaware and oblivious of like how they come across. And like, how do we balance that? But you have to be in relationships with people. You have to be willing to be accountable. And so much of my book is about compassion and accountability. You have to have both.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I love that, you're acknowledging that you have to have a balance, because I see, as you were speaking, I had like two different people pop up in my head that, they want to be advocates, but they don't really show up and really check themselves, or sometimes even check their privilege, or they're aware that the privilege exists, but they don't really have any action behind it. It's like, I want to advocate, I want to march, but I still don't have any Black friends or understand Black experience. And that, kind of irks my soul, but that's a whole different.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. One of the things I really love that Ken Hardy talks about, I talk about a little bit in my book, is that his book is on racial trauma, and he talks about the wounds of oppression and how so many Black, Brown, Indigenous, Asian, multiracial people develop this white appeasing self. And part of liberation, in my words, is that, how does my ethno-racial self show up in more and more spaces? My authentic ethno-racial self, my whole ethno-racial self, right? And so thinking about what you were talking about where you grew up and where I grew up, right? That I had to develop this really strong white appeasing self, right? Meaning like, this is the part of me that code switches. This is the part that feels non-threatening to white people. This is the part that gets me good grades and gets me promotions and gets me into spaces that other people don't have. And yet, so much of my work of the last 10 years has been about like, how do I decrease how much that white appeasing self shows up? Meaning like, it's a strategy. I can use it when I need to. Right. I mean, and yet that's not all of who I am. And how do I also make room for, to me, freedom is that, particularly like that all kinds of Black ways of showing up are wonderful, and that we do less policing of bodies and tones and hair and words and writing, and like that there's more than one way to be.
Right. Yeah. As you were talking, all I could think about was how I code switch, or used to code switch at my current job and working with people. And I think I've let so much of that go that people probably think I'm crazy at this point, because they're like, who is this girl? And why is she showing up just saying whatever and just not caring? And a lot of that has just been my journey of becoming unapologetically myself and authentic in all spaces. Can I put on the nice professional? And I don't even know why I should associate that with professional, but can I do that? Absolutely. But do I want to all the time? No. There's a space for it. But just on a regular day, I work from home. Why do I have to code switch? Like, I'm working in my pajamas. Why do I need to put on this voice or speak this way in order to be heard or valued? And, I know what I bring to the table when it comes to what I do. And so I love that you've kind of confronted that part of yourself. And I think that's something that a lot of minorities deal with in the workplace. And I think that when we don't code switch, that's when it does lead to those microaggressions that you talk about a little bit in your book. And I just wonder if you have any specific advice for people on how to navigate dealing with microaggression in the workplace.
Yeah. So when I think of microaggression, I think about any, sometimes it's not so micro, but I think
that's fair.
I think it's like anything that is insulting or shaming or like demeans people based on stereotypes, right? It could be unconscious bias. And I think what I appreciate about the trauma world is now that they see that microaggressions are a form of trauma. And, some people talk about it. I think it was like a Black psychiatrist that kind of first coined the term microaggressions, and thinking about how that stress lives in our bodies, right? And because it appears micro, sometimes we doubt ourselves about, did that happen? Am I taking this too personally? So I think working through that sense and deciding for ourselves, do I want to put the emotional labor in to address this? Is it enough for me to name it for myself? Is it enough for me to chat with friends about it? Will I feel better if I name it? I think thinking about like death by 1,000 little cuts, or like a lot of mosquito bites, that accumulates over time. And I think about how, particularly as Black women, or even like Black non-binary, or just people of color in general, there's a lot of research out there about the weathering effect, right? Like how those repeated indignities, those repeated stressors, right? Just even having to use energy to think about race and racism on a daily basis, the cost over time is shorter lifespan, more vulnerability to disease, and it weathers our internal systems. And so thinking about like, how do we not let that stuff go unaddressed inside of ourselves, right? Like how do we minimize eating it away, drinking it away, smoking it away, stuffing it, all the ways in which we learn to just like suck it up. And, I love this idea of becoming friends with rage. I feel like so much of the last several years has been about becoming friends with rage. And that rage doesn't have to be destructive. Rage can be really mobilizing. It can be empowering, and it can help fight for justice so that perhaps other people don't have to do it. I think about the more I'm in leadership roles and the more I have like some social leverage or proximity to privilege and resources, the more responsibility I have to open the doors for other people and to speak truth that maybe others are too scared to, or that it would be too dangerous for them to, especially in this time that we're living in, is like balancing. How do you keep yourself safe, but also how do you not be complicit with harm happening to other people? Yeah. And that's the dance, right? Is like taking care of you yourself and your family and your community, but while also trying to be a good ancestor. And I think that part of healing racial trauma is channeling rage in productive ways, but also learning to speak up if we're used to being quiet about these things. And I think that's part of the backlash of the last several years, is particularly, I think, Black Lives Matter, which has been around for like over a decade, is I think so much truth telling and so much honoring the racial trauma of Black people, and wanting some accountability around state sanctioned violence and inequities, that becomes like hard for people to hear and want to take ownership around, particularly people who are in power and want to maintain that power and want to keep things as they were.
Right. Yeah. A lot of gatekeeping and a lot of just not showing up for us as people. And that's why I love so much about what you do. I kind of find myself being an advocate in a lot of different spaces. Like I said, being from Georgia, in Georgia, kind of in line with what you do a bit. I went to a conference a couple of years ago, and there was no representation, and this is for counselors, and there was barely any representation from Black people teaching workshops or anything specifically related to counseling BIPOC people. And I was like, either I can complain about it or I can be a part of the solution. And I went back the next year and I presented on, being able to work with our communities and understanding how trauma impacts us. And so it drains me to do that type of work. That's why I admire so much of what you do, because I feel like it's a weight to have to teach and pour out of yourself to try to change, people and help people understand our struggle and why we are the way that we are and why so many of us carry this with us. It's really, really hard work. So I appreciate what you do. And I thank you for what you do, and for just sharing space with me today and being able to honor that part of you. So I want to shift gears a bit And I want to put you in the hot seat for a second.
All right.
I told you before the show, I don't want to hear from Dr. Edmond. I want to hear from Nathalie. And I want to know, how do you personally connect with the idea of being self-aware and fucked up?
Mm-hmm. Well, I start every morning meditating. And to me, that is kind of a way that I check in with myself. Mm-hmm. How am I showing up? How is my body feeling? How's my spirit feeling? And, that some days it's heavy and sad and raging, and other days it's peaceful, right? And I feel like how I start my day makes such an impact, because sometimes when I notice I'm more vulnerable, right? Like maybe I'm more irritable, or I just feel a heaviness, I can shift a little bit in my day. And I think that helps me do less harm in the world to myself and to other people. Just that, 10 minutes in the morning of just checking in with myself. And I mean, I'm someone who loves to read. I love to find ways to nourish my spirit and to do good stuff in the world. And so I think about when my body, I try to listen a lot, right? As a trauma therapist, I try to listen a lot to my body, because I think my mind will tell me stories that will take me sometimes in places that are not helpful, right? Like my ego will take me to places and say, you can do that. Oh yeah, you can do that too. And I need to listen to my body. If my body says no, I love this yoga teacher who used to say, is it a full body yes? And so I've really over the last couple of years tried to listen to that, right? Somebody asks me to do something, or I have an idea and I take a moment. Sometimes I take a day or two and I'm like, is it a full body yes? If it's not, then hell no, right? If it's not a full body yes, it's a hell no. And that's the muscle I've had to build, because I found myself for years in this cycle of lots of excitement, do a lot of things. And then I would feel overwhelmed and like too much. And then I would crash, and then I would oh, this is so restful. And then I'd get bored, and then I'd start again. And I was like, I need to get off the roller coaster. Mm-hmm. I need to stop this. And so this full body yes has been a game changer, but also confronting the stories I have about rest. When I have a lot of downtime, what did I do with my downtime last summer? I wrote a book. And so this summer, I'm no agenda except take some trips, hang out with my kids. It's okay to not be so productive. You're enough just as you are.
Yeah. I love that. And I love that you embodying this idea of full body yes. And I like that you say no when you don't want to do it, because that's something that I preach. No is a complete sentence too. Mm-hmm. And it's okay to say no when your body does not need it or desire it. And so I love that. So thank you again so much for your time and for you being able to just kind of come and be open and share. I've learned a lot today, so I really definitely appreciate that. So can you please tell the audience, how can they connect with you? How can they purchase your book? All of the information that they can need to be able to connect.
Thank you so much for being in conversation with me today. I think that these topics are so important. People can find me on my website, drnatedmond.com. The best way to keep in touch is to sign up for my newsletter. I usually send about 2 a month, and it's usually talking about so many of the themes we talked about today. I just want more people out there to be working on their mental health and well-being and liberation. I have an online membership community called Anti-Racism Revolution, where we have a couple of workshops a month on all things related to anti-racism, embodiment, self-care, and how do we all get free? And how do we learn the strategies and skills that we need to not only survive these times, but thrive in these times? And then I also have a group practice, mindful and multicultural counseling, for people who are committed to their own mental health.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. It's space with me today. And thank you so much for all that you do. As I said, I really respect what you do because I know that it can carry a very big weight to it because trauma work is not easy to do. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Guys, please make sure that you connect with Dr. Nathalie. All of the information of how you can connect with her will be in the description of this episode. Also, make sure that you guys follow me, Tree the LPC, on all social media platforms under the handle Tree the LPC. Until next time, be safe, be well, and make sure that you take care of your mental health.